Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bring On the Bad Guys, a brand new series from Daventry Studios where we are taking a look at the villains of Marvel Comics. And this is meant to be a fun historical look at the villains that have appeared in the pages of Marvel's vast library of comics. And the way we're doing this is we have it broken down basically by two qualifications, you might say. One is time frame. So 60s, 70s, we may break that down into shorter periods of time as we reach years that have more comics published. And also, who is the superhero that these villains are most associated with or best known for fighting. So, for these villains who faced the Hulk in the 1960s, we've got two qualifications. One, they had to first start their antagonistic relationship with the Hulk during the 60s. They didn't necessarily have to first appear in a comic book starring the Hulk during that time. As you may know, the Marvel Universe is very connected, so not every appearance by every villain is going to end up in them being a featured villain by a specific hero. So, Dr. Octopus might fight the Hulk at some point, but that doesn't make him a primary Hulk villain or someone that regularly appears fighting the Hulk. So to appear on this top 10 list, these villains have to be a regular antagonist of the Hulk and have first appeared against the Hulk in the 1960s. So that all being said, we're going to start with our first villain and take a look at what we use to qualify people to appear on this list. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see the power scale on this fun little slide. And the power scale is how we rank these on our top 10 list. First of all, there's personality. That is self-explanatory. How charismatic is the character? How do they interact with other heroes and villains? Number two is their powers, so their superpowers or lack thereof. Mythology, that's everything that happens on the pages of the comics. So their origin story, the crossovers they were in, how prevalent are they in, this character's stable of rogues. Fourth is the design of the character. Again, self-explanatory. If they have a really ugly outfit, they're not going to score very high in this particular category. And finally, there's cultural impact. And cultural impact is everything that isn't on the pages of the comics. So, for example, video games, movies, TV shows, animated series. Do you see their logo on a lot of clothing? That's something else that would go into that. So that is cultural impact. And we total all those up. Each category is worth 5 points, and we reach a grand total. As you can see for the Metal Master, that grand total is not very high. The Hulk's list of 60s foes is a little thin, but it's got some heavy hitters at the end, which is what make it more fun. But we do have to start kind of slogging through this bottom of the list first. So the Metal Master, his first appearance in Incredible Hulk number 6, which was the Hulk's first series, which started in 1962, only lasted a few issues before it was canceled, and the Hulk would later be brought back in Tales to Astonish, and where he shared that magazine with first Hank Pym and then Namor, the Submariner. So the Metal Master comes from the planet Astra, and his planet, their occupants all had the same power, so they all can manipulate metal at a molecular level. So it's a little different from someone like Magneto, who has control over essentially magnetism, whereas the Metal Master actually can control the metal itself at a molecular level. So you can see in the picture where he's using a metal tower, forms ribbons out of it to attack the Hulk. The people on the Metal Master's planet use their power to create, neat art, to advance their culture. And the Metal Master was not very fond of that and wanted to use his abilities for personal gain. And so he was exiled from his home planet and ended up, of course, on Earth. And that's where he came into conflict with the Hulk. The Hulk figured out, with the help of the U.S. military, how to get him off the planet again. And he's only returned a couple times. Once he fought the Hulk, once he fought Rom, the Space Knight, and not a very prevalent person in the folklore of Marvel. So, like I said, we're going to get to the more heavy hitters here in a sec. And number 2 on the list, which is actually number 9, is going to be Amphibian, and something that's pretty classic Marvel 60s lore is to take common words and just tweak them a little bit so that they sound more exotic and fun. I'm not sure if fun quite captures the name of Amphibian with an O at the end, or close to the end, I should say. But that's what they did here. The real name of this character is Cunax, or Knax. He first appeared in Tales to Astonish 73. That was November of 1965, and again, that's when the Hulk regularly appeared in that magazine. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And his first story against the Hulk, Hulk ends up on the moon, and they end up at the home of Uatu the Watcher. And the leader, who we will get to later on in this list, wants a weapon called the Sphere of Ultimate Knowledge, which sounds absolutely like something out of a Marvel comic. And so the leader manages to convince the Hulk to go steal it for him. However, Amphibian was also on the moon at the home of the Watcher to do the same thing, but on behalf of his race on the planet Xantar, which is not Xandar from Guardians of the Galaxy. Very subtle difference. So the Watcher, as he is famous for doing, has a vow of non-interference, so he just let them duke it out. Hulk ends up winning because he's Hulk, and Knax had to report back to his people and face exile because he failed. He appeared in the 1960s Marvel Superheroes animated series. We're looking at his personality. Again, he's very Hulk-like, at least in his early appearances, in that he's probably a little smarter than the Hulk, but he doesn't do a whole lot of talking and basically just tries to match the Hulk blow for blow. Doesn't always work out. His powers, again, very Hulk-like. Super strength. He is able to have a battle with the Hulk, even though it doesn't go particularly well for him. And cultural impact, again, one episode of an animated series in the 60s didn't go very far for advancing his lore. Moving on to number 8, we have the amazingly named Glob, who's actually kind of a fun character and one of my more favorite obscure Marvel characters. His real name is Joe Timms, and he first appeared a little before Marvel went with the Man-Thing as one of their more swamp/bayou characters. And so you might want to look at the Glob as like a discount Swamp Thing or Man-Thing. First appearance, Incredible Hulk 121, where they reveal that Joe Timms had gotten out of prison and ended up dying in a swamp outside Miami. And the chemicals in the swamp reanimated him, and he ends up kidnapping Betty Ross because she reminds him of his previous girlfriend. And he stomps off into the swamp with Betty Ross, and of course the Hulk goes after him and defeats him and gets Betty Ross back. Now the interesting thing about the Glob story is that later he would appear in Man-Thing comics, and at that point only his brain survived, and he was known as the Golden Brain, and he was kind of worshipped as a cult following by a group of druid-like people that, of course, lived in the Florida bayou, naturally. He was created by Roy Thomas and Herb Trimpe, and he, as referred to in the pages of Incredible Hulk 121 and further comics, his strength matches the Hulk before Hulk's really ramps up due to his anger. And he doesn't have to really breathe, so he has a distinct advantage in being basically composed of mud and muck. That's why he's a glob, and has a better time of it against the Hulk than maybe someone that can actually use their brain and think. That's the Glob. The Glob, hasn't appeared in anything really off the pages of comics. So I can't imagine that really changing, at least as far as the MCU is concerned. But that's the Glob. So fun swamp creatures. Number 7, Tyrannus. And here we start to get into... Marvel had a number of characters that were based underground. So the Mole Man is the most famous of them because he was the first Marvel supervillain ever. But this guy, whose name is Romulus Augustus, was another one. And he frequently found himself in subterranean conflict against the Mole Man. But he is basically an immortal being who originated in the Roman Empire on the planet Earth. He first appeared in Incredible Hulk number 5. Again, that's the first series starring the Hulk. And he, as is often the case, kidnapped Betty Ross and used her to lure the Hulk and try to obtain his power to fight in his war against both the subterranean rival kingdoms and also to gain access to the surface. And he's kind of a one-note villain in that aspect, in that he's just kind of after power and will do anything to increase his status in both the supervillain world and the world at large. So for that reason, his personality is not that great. He has a 2 on that scale. Powers, again, it depends a lot on his scientific know-how and if he can be able to transfer either the powers of the Hulk to himself, or if he's managing to command legions of monsters from the underworld. The mythology, again, not a lot of wonderful stories starring Romulus Augustus. He has appeared in a couple video games, the Game Boy Advance Hulk video game, and there was also a platform, I believe it was for Sega, Incredible Hulk game in the mid-90s, and he appeared in that, as well as one episode of Marvel Superheroes in the 60s. So not a villain that has been often utilized by things off the pages of comics. So we give him a total score of 10 in the power department, and he ranks, of course, 7th overall on this list. Number 6 brings us to the Ringmaster, Maynard Tybalt. And the Ringmaster is one of those characters that circulated a lot around all the superheroes in the 60s. So he started off in Incredible Hulk number 3, running the Circus of Crime with his hat, as you can see, with the little spin wheel thing on the front that he used to hypnotize audiences and convince them to do his dirty work for him, such as, robbing banks and, standard baddie 60s stuff. The interesting thing about his history is that while he was created by, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, his father was from Austria and was actually a Nazi. So his father is the one who had his hypnosis hat originally, fought against Captain America in World War II. And because his father didn't beat Captain America, the Nazis killed him, as Nazis are wont to do. So Maynard inherited everything, including the circus. He moved to the U.S., changed it into, as I said, the Circus of Crime, and used it as a front to carry out criminal operations. He fought Hulk, Thor, Daredevil, Spider-Man, Ant-Man in the 1960s. Not a lot, and early 70s, I should say. Not a lot of success. A lot of that has to do with the fact that his power is almost entirely wrapped up in if he's wearing his hat or not. He actually was he actually has appeared in a live-action television show. He was in season 2 of Jessica Jones as a hypnotherapist, and so we don't get to actually see him be his true Ringmaster villain because he's kind of runs up against the buzzsaw that is Jessica Jones, and doesn't stick around too long. He's been in 5 different animated shows: Marvel Superheroes, Avengers Assemble, Avengers United They Stand, the Superhero Squad show, and then he was also in the 1980s Spider-Man animated series. For personality, we handed him a 2. Again, he's just not, even for a circus leader, he's not that charismatic an individual. His audiences usually end up watching because they're hypnotized. Powers, again, all tied to his hat. They work really well, but they are tied to his hat. Mythology, again, he ended up as a punching bag for a lot of, early Marvel superheroes. And cultural impact, we did we gave him a 3 on that just because he has appeared in quite a few animated shows and the Jessica Jones series. So his total ends up at 11. And we move on from number 6 to number 5, and that is Boomerang. And Boomerang is very similar to a DC Comics character called Captain Boomerang, and it does, very much the same thing, except isn't quite as much of a loser as Captain Boomerang is depicted. Frederick Myers, who is Boomerang, first appeared in Tales to Astonish, 81, in July 1966. And he hails from Alice Springs, Australia, as you can imagine, having the Boomerang motif down, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And Captain Boomerang from DC predates this character by about 6 years. So I wouldn't call it an exact copycat, but DC definitely has, the more has dibs on the Boomerang motif as a supervillain trope first. So he meaning Boomerang from Marvel, he was sent by a secret society known as the Secret Empire to hunt down the Hulk. Now, in the early days of the Hulk, people hadn't quite figured out that, he was not a pushover, except the army, who knew that from regular battles with the Green Goliath. So he took a job as a mercenary to try to take down the Hulk. It didn't really work, and since then he's had to fight Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Punisher. He's been part of the Sinister Six and the Masters of Evil. He's primarily a Spider-Man villain these days. In fact, he's appearing as a series regular in Spider-Man's current comic book series, where he is more of an anti-hero, a fun-loving anti-hero, than a nemesis of Spider-Man. They are currently working together. And he has not yet appeared on the big screen, and I don't know that is particularly likely, especially because Suicide Squad has already seen Captain Boomerang appear for DC, but he has been in animated shows, the 60s Marvel superheroes, where they took a lot of plots right out of the pages of the comic. Avengers United They Stand and Ultimate Spider-Man. He's been in a couple video games. His biggest role was in Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge as one of the mini-bosses. For his power scale points breakdown, personality, we handed him a 3. He does have a decent, fun-loving personality, even though he's a villain. His powers, again, are all tied up in his boomerangs and weaponized boomerangs, although he is a good hand-to-hand fighter. If you took away the boomerangs from both Frederick Myers and Captain Boomerang from DC, you'd probably want to bet on Marvel's Boomerang to win, because he has more combat training than Captain Boomerang. Mythology, again, he's more of a Spider-Man villain these days, and he's appeared, in a decent amount of comics, either on his own or in supervillain groups. And design, he's kind of had some ugly designs to begin with. His first design costume was red and white with a lot of red-looking buttons when he fought the Hulk, and really not that impressive. His more recent costume that you see here is a little cooler, although also a little awkward-looking. So we give him a 2 on the design. Cultural Impact 3, again, for the video game and animated series appearances. Now we're going to go to number 4, who is Rhino. And here's our little chance to make a clarification as I'm able to show off my Rhino bobblehead here. We'll put him next to Hulk here and Mr. Banner. So Rhino, as you likely know, is a Spider-Man villain primarily. And he makes this list because he did fight against Hulk in the 1960s. And Rhino is one of the few humans that can match Hulk in terms of, being able to engage in a hand-to-hand, as it were, fight with Hulk. And of course, Hulk is, more powerful the stronger he gets. But Rhino also has considerable strength and is able to hold his own against the Hulk for at least a limited time. And there are some really fun battles between the two. Rhino is one of the people that his intelligence is probably about the same level as Hulk's, even when Hulk is not, using Banner's mind. And so you have a couple, behemoths with little brain power going at each other, and so it ends up just being a brutal blow-for-blow fight. That, again, the Hulk usually wins, but it's a fun thing to see, at least on the comic book pages. So Rhino, first appearance, Amazing Spider-Man, number 41 in October 1966. The first time he appeared in a Hulk comic was Incredible Hulk 104 in June 1968. And one quick note about that comic volume, Incredible Hulk Volume 2, you didn't miss a lot, or anything I should say, in the numbering, because it jumped due to the fact that Hulk appeared in Tales to Astonish. And when Marvel hit the expand button really fast in the late 1960s, they split their books like Tales to Astonish, Strange Tales, who were doing 2 stories at once about 2 different superheroes, and they decided that the books were doing well enough that each hero had to have their own book. So Tales to Astonish changed into Incredible Hulk. So we end up at 104, even though there's only a few years between 104 and Incredible Hulk, number 6, for instance. The Rhino comes from Russia. He famously was duped into, putting on the Rhino suit and basically being sealed into it. That has kind of changed a little bit throughout the years, but at first it was more of this tragic decision made by this dim-witted individual to make a quick buck and get sealed inside this Rhino suit that increased his strength and durability and so forth. He also has enhanced speed, and early appearances, you can't tell that the Rhino suit provides a lot of protection, but it is actually technically armor, so it does provide him additional padding and resistance against the people he's fighting. He first came to the United States to try to kidnap J. Jonah Jameson's son, John. Spider-Man, much to JJJ's chagrin, stopped him and sent Rhino to jail. And he was broken out of jail by some shady behind-the-scenes forces who wanted him to take on the Hulk. And he went on to have his first brawl again with the Hulk in 1968, and has come into contact with old Greenskin quite a few times since then. Of course, we see Rhino a lot in video games. He's in almost every single Spider-Man video game, including the most recent PlayStation 4 exclusive game. he is a playable character in the Lego Marvel Superheroes games and in Spider-Man Friend or Foe. I really did enjoy his armor in the latest Spider-Man game because it's updated, but also not... well, in Amazing Spider-Man 2, we see Paul Giamatti play the character for about 5 seconds, and that's the more Transformer-looking armor that the Rhino has worn in some versions, and there's just something missing there, where it's less of a tragic character, even though the uniform can look clunky. So we haven't seen Rhino properly introduced on the big screen, so we'll see if he shows up in either Sony's plans or the MCU. But it would be nice to see a legit version of Rhino as opposed to what we got for 5 seconds in the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man 2. Rhino was created by Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. Personality, as we've kind of touched on, we give him a 1. He's not the brightest bulb in the shed. He usually ends up in his fellow supervillains' way if he is trying to team up with them. If you have played the recent Spider-Man video game, Scorpion has a very difficult time staying out of Rhino's way and lets Rhino hear about it because Rhino doesn't follow directions very well. Mythology, we give him a 3. Powers, 4. Design, a 3. Again, the suit is really ugly at first, but in more modern updates, it looks more menacing. Cultural impact, 4, just for his very consistent appearances in Spider-Man video games, animated series, and then also the 1 movie appearance. We move to number 3, and now we really get to the heavy hitters that are specifically and almost exclusively Hulk villains. And first is Emil Blonsky, who is Abomination, and we've seen him on the big screen. He first appeared in Tales to Astonish, number 90, April 1967. He hails from Croatia, and he was created by Stan Lee and Gil Kane. And he had superhuman strength, stamina, and durability, healing factor, and like the Hulk, he's immune to gamma radiation. And again, as is the case with a lot of Hulk villains, very monstrous in appearance and also very, very strong, so that they can actually have a fight, without the Hulk just running over the villain right away. Blonsky went undercover at the military base that was occupied by Dr. Banner and General Ross and company. And he got into Banner's lab and unfortunately pressed the wrong buttons and ended up turning into the Abomination. So his origin story is a little different from that in the MCU, although not ridiculously different. His personality, so Abomination has over the years been able to get under Hulk's skin in ways that other monster-type characters have not, just because he still does possess all his human faculties and brains, and being a secret agent before his supervillain career, has a little bit of a strategy experience in his background. So his personality sits at 3, powers 4, because again he's able to actually have a blow-for-blow battle with the Hulk. His mythology and backstory gets him a 3. Just for the record, as we go forth, kind of the standard mythology for most of the Marvel characters is a 3, unless they have really done some really, really cool stuff. Generally, we try not to go too much below a 3 for a regular villain, just because there's so much. Marvel's been around for decades, and each of these characters has some fun stories, almost without exception. So it's really hard for a regular to get below a 3 in mythology, and it's really hard for someone that hasn't been around a lot to get more than 3. Design, also a 3. That's a design that's changed a little bit here and there. The winged ears are kind of Abomination's trademark, although he didn't get them on the big screen. And then brings us to his cultural impact, where he's a 4. And of course, Tim Roth plays Blonsky and Abomination in the second MCU movie, The Incredible Hulk. And people overlook that movie a lot because it's not referenced as much as other MCU movies. We're starting to see General Ross more and more. As we move forward, we're going to see him in Black Widow. But there's not a lot of references to the Edward Norton Incredible Hulk movie. So a lot of people don't remember Tim Roth's turn as Blonsky, and Tim Roth did a really good job playing the character. And the battle between Hulk and Abomination in Harlem is one of my favorite battles in the MCU. It's just a brawl, monster versus monster, using everything from, cars and fire escapes and bone spurs, to, fight each other. And you get the iconic first mention of Hulk smash as well in that fight. If you read the tie-in comics to the MCU, it's revealed that Blonsky has been returned to human form and is in S.H.I.E.L.D. custody, although we don't know what happened to him after S.H.I.E.L.D. fell in Captain America Winter Soldier. So there's a chance that he could come back, and I believe Tim Roth has said that he would be interested in returning. He's also been in animated series and in video games. He's a playable character in the Lego Marvel games, where he's a very similar, character to Hulk. Number 2 on our list is the Leader. And the easiest way to describe the Leader is that he is as intelligent as the Hulk is strong. So his brain, as you can see, has been enlarged by gamma radiation and is one of Marvel's greatest masterminds that works behind the scenes to primarily fight against the Hulk, but also other characters as well. His real name, Sam Stearns. First appearance, Tales to Astonish 62 in December of 1964. He's from Boise, Idaho. So congratulations to my friend Ashley, who lives in Idaho. Not many superheroes or villains come from the great state of Idaho. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were the creators. For his personality, we give him a 4, and that was... I almost gave him a 3, but I gave him a 4 because his intelligence is so off the charts that he's able to manipulate people while taking on different personalities, not in a superhuman way, but in a conniving, manipulative way where he can present himself as a different kind of person to different people without revealing his identity. So he has that almost chameleon-like ability to manipulate people and their wants and needs. Powers, usually if someone is super smart, they don't necessarily get a 4 because smarts don't always lead to, success. But the Leader has been one of Hulk's archenemies since, 1964. And he is absolutely no match for him in a physical fight, but has still managed to concoct some of the, greatest schemes against Hulk. In fact, you probably would say that he is the highest ranked actual villain on this list. We'll see number 1 in a bit. And number 1 is, I wouldn't quite label him as a straight up villain to the Hulk, more of a nemesis. But Mythology is 3. He has had some very, very fun comic book stories and has definitely been responsible for, that final reveal, like, oh, who was behind the whole thing? Oh, it was the Leader. And has done that against Hulk, against the Thing, against a lot of different Marvel characters. The other interesting thing about the Leader that makes him more of a wild card in the mythology section is that he is almost mercenary-like in what he decides he wants to pursue. So he doesn't care about country, he doesn't care about politics, he doesn't care about anything except advancing his own plans. So he tends to insulate himself in the middle of this spider's web, per se. And, mercenaries, robots, androids, monsters, he can pull all those threads. And usually he's only revealed as the mastermind after a lot of punching by the Hulk. And in the MCU, as we move to... Well, let's do design first, because I almost forgot about that. Various comic artists have tried to find a good way to depict the leader's oversized brain. The picture here that we have displayed is more or less the most common one. There's also kind of the bulbous look that he got, in the 90s and such. But this is the most famous, with the tall forehead. It's not a particularly suave look, but I'm not quite sure if there's a whole lot of great ways to incorporate a huge giant brain into, a skull and make it look suave. So we're going to give the design team a 3 on that. Cultural impact, we also give a 3. And you can make an argument for a 4, but we left him at 3 because we haven't quite seen the leader on the big screen. Now, Tim Blake Nelson plays Sam Stearns in The Incredible Hulk. Whereas in the comics, the leader started out as a janitor. Sam Stearns in the MCU is a cellular biologist, and in The Incredible Hulk, Dr. Banner reaches out and tries to get Dr. Stearns' help in curing him of the Hulk. And they, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Incredible Hulk, once Banner finally gets to New York City and meets with Stearns, he discovers that Stearns has taken on these blood samples that Banner has sent him and is planning on using them for research, for medical study and all this stuff. And Banner and Betty Ross are insistent that he destroy it all. Blonsky comes in, catches the Hulk, looks at Stearns' lab, and then forces Dr. Stearns to inject him with some of Banner's blood, which turns him into the Abomination. So if you're paying close attention, or even not close attention, some of that blood seeps into an open head wound gash in Stearns' head after he's knocked over by Abomination, and you start to see his forehead and his skull under his forehead bubbling a little bit. And that's the first indication that we have that the leader may exist in the MCU. It hasn't moved beyond that. Although, like Abomination, in the tie-in comics, it's shown that Stearns has been moved to a secure S.H.I.E.L.D. prison. So we may or may not see more of him in the future. It may end up being a legal question, as I know there's some legal gray area over whether Marvel can make a solo Hulk movie, because I believe a different studio may still have the rights. That's kind of a gray area. It's unknown whether that has changed within the last year or so. We see the leader a lot in Marvel video games. He's a playable character in the Lego games that are based on Marvel. He's appeared as the primary antagonist as the Hulk movie spin-off game, which, as you know, probably was kind of standard fare for the early years of the MCU, was every movie also got a spin-off game. The 94 Hulk game for Genesis and Super Nintendo, he was the primary antagonist for that. He's been featured in animated series. Almost any time the Hulk appears in an animated series, the leader also appears at some point in that series. He was a regular antagonist in the 1990s Hulk series. Growing up, that was a series that was on that I enjoyed. And before we get to number 1, just kidding, I'm not going to make you wait in suspense. We're going to go right to number 1. Number 1 is General Thunderbolt Ross. And as I briefly mentioned, he's not so much a villain in the Marvel Universe as a nemesis for the Hulk, because as we can see in the MCU movies, he is a very rigid military leader, and he's been around in the comics and on the big screen, as long as the Hulk has. His first appearance was in Incredible Hulk #1, way back in July 1962, and he is in charge, as at least military-wise, of the laboratory that is undergoing the gamma bomb test that ends up trapping Banner in its blast radius and turning him into the Hulk. So he's been there since the very beginning. Of course, he's also the father of the main love interest for most of the Hulk series, Betty Ross. He's from New Hampshire in the United States originally. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Again, the very first Hulk issue featured General Ross as Not necessarily the antagonist, but a foil to Banner, a very gruff military man. Personality wise, 4. Because he's a very strong leader. As much as Banner and he don't get along, he is a very good military tactician. He knows what he's doing, and he, is smart enough for the government to keep him after the Hulk for decades. So, he can be very charismatic when he wants to. He doesn't always want to. Moving on, powers. I gave him a 3, and some of that has to do with the next category as well in the mythology, where he gets a 5, and that's because, again, spoiler alert, eventually he decides that to really get on the same level as the Hulk, he needs to become like the Hulk. So he turns into the Red Hulk. In Red Hulk form, he was, part of the Avengers and some other teams. So obviously his power goes up and strength goes up significantly when he is the Red Hulk. But throughout his career, on an average, we'll give him 3 for powers. And if you haven't read any of the Red Hulk stories, especially the origin, they're very, very much a good read. So I encourage you to check those out. Design, we give him a 3 because he's usually just in a military outfit. So he looks dapper in his military outfit and cigar. And cultural impact, 4, because again, he's been the Hulk's, arch enemy since the very beginning. And that means he is in a lot of TV shows and video games. He was played by Sam Elliott in Ang Lee's Hulk, William Hurt in the MCU, and we've seen him, in the Incredible Hulk movie, Civil War, the rest of the Avengers movies, and also we're going to see him in Black Widow, and there's a lot of rumors swirling that he's going to put together the Thunderbolts like he did in the comics. So he also appeared in the Marvel one-shot The Consultant, talking to Tony Stark, which is almost exactly the same interaction that he has with Tony Stark at the end of The Incredible Hulk. A lot of Marvel TV shows, animated, and video games he's been a part of. He's a playable character in, I believe, all of the Lego Marvel games. For you YouTube watchers, you'll notice that on the graphics here, I've got the first lines that each of these characters ever said in the comics. And I think General Ross has a very foreboding line, and he, bursts into the room where Banner and his fellow scientists are getting ready for this gamma bomb test. And he says, "Why the delay, Banner? What are you waiting for?" And I think, at the time it was not written to be especially profound, but it's such a, looking back, an ominous, statement. What are you waiting for? Why the delay? Here's, a moment that obviously changed Banner's life forever and the lives of everybody in that room. And, with the tragedy of the Hulk and Banner trying to be cured of, his monstrous alter ego, and to look back and say, his first interaction with General Ross is coming in his usually blustering self, what are you waiting for? And Banner tries to explain what he is waiting for. He wants to make sure that everything's clear, everything's safe. Ross doesn't have the patience for that. And of course, as the story goes, Rick Jones drives his truck out into the test site. Banner tries to stop the test, tries to run out, save Rick Jones, and gets caught in the blast. So very foreboding first lines by General Ross. Why the delay, Banner? What are you waiting for? So that is our top 10 Hulk villains from the 60s. Thanks for listening. Next week, and by next week I mean later this week, because I posted this video a little later than I wanted, we're going to do the Fantastic Four. And they are my favorite superhero team of all time. And they have a really good rogues gallery where I had a hard time deciding who to keep in the top 10. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you can subscribe to, did I say subscribe? Hopefully you can subscribe to the Daventry Studios channel and get regular updates for when we have new videos coming up. We've also got concerts available. We're going to start video game live streaming soon. So keep an eye on Daventry Studios because we're trying to ramp up our content here in the middle of all this coronavirus stuff that's going around. So thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and wash your hands.